Dear colleagues, my fellow teachers and champion teachers, I'm Ruterana Johnson, a teacher of chemistry at ES Kayonza, District Kayonza, Training Center, Groups Koreri, Mukaranje, in Nyamirama, in Kayonza District, and the school is in Nyamirama sector. Allow me to take this opportunity to thank and welcome the idea of Director General of AIMS TTP Rwanda, Dr. Helene Otieno Menya, of bringing the idea of teachers of science and mathematics to share teaching experiences that are taking place in our classroom in order to implement the competence-based curriculum. During our trainings, I have attended all of them, we had the assessment. We discussed in details about assessment as learning, assessment of learning, and assessment for learning. We have shared the ideas about how all those aspects of learning are taking place in everyday classroom activities. But there is one thing we did not discuss, which I'm going to discuss with you and share today. This document I'm sharing, or a PowerPoint, I had prepared it before COVID challenge in a third term, but I did not conduct this CPD for chemistry group because of this COVID, and have decided to share with all teachers of chemistry in this teaching platform, so that when we are assessing, we have to set the rubric. And when I'm talking about the rubric for assessment, it shows the criteria at which a teacher is setting a question. As an introduction to this presentation, in education, a teacher has to teach. Automatically, that is our role. While learners have to learn, that is their role. And then, during this teaching, a teacher has to assess the learners while they are learning, and then this assessment, which is done by the teacher, has to consider different criteria, and then these criteria should be related to the learning and teaching objectives. Below, as a teacher of chemistry, I have chosen a unit in Senior 4 chemistry, which has a relationship with another unit in Senior 2, formation of ionic bond and metallic bond. Subunit, again, we are going to focus on it is ionic bond. The lesson title, formation of ionic bond. And here from the lesson title, I have to set the learning objective. says by the end of this lesson, the learner should be able to explain the formation of ionic bond between sodium and chlorine. So here it means that sodium and chlorine are starting examples to explain how the ionic bond is formed. Now here from this learning objective, you have to, as a teacher, to sit down and think about how to set the specific objective of which you will start setting the criteria or setting the rubric for assessment. One is to identify correct atoms using symbol on periodic table of element, to indicate appropriate charges, to explain satisfactorily the formation of ionic bond. What these specific objectives mean? These are specific ideas of which a teacher is able to assess during examination, during exercise, during homework, during a test. Now the question is, it is an open-ended question. Here a student has to give all explanations. Explain how ionic bond is formed between sodium and chlorine. Total marks 6. And then if I can ask you as a teacher, how many marks you can award to this question? Now, as a person who is sharing experience in assessment protocol, this is a tool. Rubric for assessment is assessment tool called analytic rubric. This assessment tool, it gives all or considers all information that has been written by a student during answering the question. You have to analyze all the information and get a mark for that student. It describes the number of rubrics, and this number of rubrics correspond to the learning objectives you have set and of which you are going to assess. And then you have to indicate the performance or assessment criteria. Which criteria are you going to assess? And then from which criteria, how many marks are you going to award? Those are scores. Those are scores. Now, the total score for each rubric or each criteria are 2 marks. Now, back to the question. Now, the learning objective, so the specific objective, one was to identify the correct atoms by symbols on a periodic table of elements. Now, for this criteria means that, is a student able to identify the correct symbols on the periodic table? One atom, 1 mark, another atom, another mark. Those are the 2 marks. If a student has given only 1 correct atom, the student doesn't know the next atom, how it is written. 1 mark. So you get a half of the total score. Now, has failed to indicate any correct symbol, get 0. That is the first criteria. The second criteria, indicate appropriate ions or charges. So now it means that in this criteria, a student would have studied how the atoms change to ions. He has to indicate, or he will be able to indicate, if the ions has formed positive charge, sodium, chloride ions, that is chloride minus, or can give the names of those ions. Full mark, 2 score. And if a student has provided only one correct ion, get 1 mark. Failed to indicate appropriate ions or charges, get 0. The third criteria, we are still marking 1 question, but assessing different specific objectives to make this student get marks. The third criteria is to explain satisfactorily the formation of ionic bond. Now, when we say satisfactory, it means that a student is able to convince the teacher that understood the lesson on how bonding is taking place between metals and non-metal. Now the explanation, student may give full explanation. Sodium loses 1 electron, which is then transferred to chlorine to attain the stability, resulting into ionic bond. You get that point? Here, a student has tried to give all the information required for answering this question. So now here, the student will get the full score, 2 marks for this rubric or this criteria. Or we can explain this using illustrations showing on how sodium atom lose electron in red color, transferred to chlorine, and then after he or she give what happens after the bonding to form sodium chloride, which formed by ionic bond. So now the illustrations are very clear. If a student has brought these or illustrated these illustrations to explain what is taking place in words, we'll get the full score, 2 marks for this rubric. Then if a student has provided that sodium atom loses while chlorine gains only, or give a structure illustration on how electron is transferred to chlorine only, did not give the result. Here, a student is not getting 0 because he has tried to give the information, even if it is not satisfactory, to reach the correct answer, but the student was in the way of giving the right answer, so he or she has to get a mark. Now on this point here, you'd find that when we are marking as teachers, such a student would give him or her 0. No, because he or she has remembered that, or has tried to recall that there is something on how the atom is losing, another one is gaining, even if he has not reached to the analysis of the result, but the student was in the way of answering the question, has to get something. Then failed to explain the formation of ionic bond or appropriate illustration for the formation of the ionic bond, then that person gets 0. Now, how do we add the marks? For each rubric, we have said that the total score is 2 marks. So now here, when you add the total marks for all rubrics, the student will get 6 marks when he has given full information about answering the question. If a student has given half information, will get 3 marks. And then if the student has failed to explain all the information required will get 0. Allow me also to assure you that if a teacher has developed this tool for assessment, they developed the rubric for assessment, a student cannot get 0, or the number of students who fails with 0 will reduce. And once the number of failures reduced in chemistry, which the students will love chemistry, and then will do harder to get good marks in this subject. And then after you have assessed, considered all the points, because this tool consider and analyze all concepts that were written by the learner during answering the question. Of course, you have to analyze all the statements. You don't mark giving right 0, but you have also to read and understand the information and find out if you can get the way of giving a mark. So now, after you have marked the student, you have awarded the student, you have to give the comment. What kind of a comment? On the answer sheet of the student should be constructive, as we discussed in our previous trainings about the assessment. The comment should encourage the student to work hard and improve on his or her understanding in chemistry subject. Now, to conclude about this presentation, according to assessment rubrics, the marks which assess or give to students remark their origin. Actually, sorry, I'm very sorry for that. This means that all the marks given to the student or awarded to the information of the students, when we have set this learning objective and we have considered the rubric for assessment, a student will know that I have failed this point because I did not give this information. So it means that this tool signifies the origin of the marks we give to students. And then these marks we normally give to students are not punishment. Rather, to improve the student's learning process to the next lesson. Now, what does it mean? If a student has got 0 totally, or have got the number of students that have got 0 who have failed, to give detailed explanation or satisfactory explanation about how ionic bond is formed, you can suggest or take a decision of repeating the lesson, because this rubric, it gives the picture on how the student understood the lesson. And the average of the marks in class testifies how a teacher taught, as I have been explaining, the assessed lesson, and then by the end of the assessment, a teacher should repeat the lesson to the student or change the teaching or learning approach. Exactly, if the students have passed the lesson, it means that they have attained all these specific objectives you have set, and they have high score in the criteria of assessment. Here, no need of repeating the lesson. But if you have found that the student big number, and they remember during the assessment, and the statistics are giving you large number of those who have failures, so it means that these objectives were not attained. So you need to repeat the lesson so that this objective has to be attained. And then through repeating the lesson, you have to even change the teaching and learning approach. And this teaching and learning approach, if you have been using group discussion as a teaching or learning approach, you can change to another so that you reach at the level where you find that the students have tried to attain the objectives. So, dear colleagues, teachers, champion teachers, district coordinators, and Dr. Herin's idea is significant and contributive to the sharing experiences in teaching. And then if you need more explanations or more details about rubric for assessment, you can check on the reference below. And I thank you very much for listening to this video presentation, and I wish you all to meet with all our students in next coming term. May God bless me and you who have listened and watched this video. Thank you very much.